Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to have you joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy evening to come and spend some time with the ICAS team here, working through our parent webinar for this year. And we're delighted to have you along to share some information about understanding ICAS and hopefully sharing with you some key information around the ICAS academic competition and the celebration of student learning that we're able to support students with right across Australia and New Zealand and further abroad internationally as well. So I'd love to be able to, first of all, introduce our presenters this evening and familiarise you with who we've got sharing information with you tonight. My name is Matt Linn. I'm Head of Global Sales across Janison Assessment Programs, including ICAS, and it's a real privilege to be able to share with you some of the key components of ICAS tonight. Nick Connolly, our Head of Analysis and Reporting, sadly has been pulled away at the last minute this evening and won't be able to join us. However, we're delighted to have Nardin Hanna along, who is one of our core ICAS Assessment Consultants and really expert in all things ICAS, works very actively with our schools and communities right across Australia and New Zealand in supporting their engagement with the ICAS academic competition year on year. So we'll start and get straight into things. This webinar format is designed for us to be able to share with you information. So we usually have high volumes of parents joining us, which is wonderful. What that does mean is usually we'll be sharing a lot of information. So this particular forum won't allow us to be able to answer questions just due to the sheer volume of parents we have on the call. However, what we'd love to be able to do is work with you and answer your questions. Nadine will share with you the way that can be done at the end of this webinar. However, this particular webinar will be more around us sharing information with you and supporting your access and understanding of what the competition is, how we work, the way we set the assessments and so on. And so we'll begin first of all by looking at the assessment design. And we'd love to be able to break that down with you first of all. Why do we design ICAS the way we do? What's it all about? So ICAS, first of all, is very much an international academic competition. It's designed to be able to support and celebrate academic achievement in the same way that we often do, and particularly in Australia and New Zealand, we celebrate sporting achievements, we celebrate these things, and we celebrate and recognise students. What we're seeking to do and really provide and celebrate is the platform for students academically to be able to demonstrate their growth, their challenge year on year, being able to celebrate that both at a school level, at home with the family, and being able to really give them the opportunity to excel and work alongside their peers in the ICAS competition. So when we move into the assessment design piece, the way our assessments are constructed and the way our test development team work is that our assessments are structured around higher order thinking skills. What we're trying to do within the individual questions that we ask right across each assessment, we're asking students to think very abstractly and make connections between concepts. Now, this is quite unique. It's different to a range of assessments that we might have and a student might be doing at school, where that's not necessarily just rote memorization. It's not necessarily that they've got this particular question, they're familiar with it and they can respond to it. What we're trying to do is present them with a range of unique scenarios and allow them to use their skills to be able to make connections with the skills and knowledge that they do have to these unusual or perhaps really interesting concepts and scenarios we're presenting them with, to be able to apply that and be successful through answering this question. And so what we're trying to do is ask students to think really critically, apply that knowledge in a really abstract way, be able to analyse the question, problem solve, evaluate, and make decisions based upon this scenario that they're presented with. And so really what we're trying to do is provide them with skills and the capacity to be able to respond in this way that actually ideally sets them up for life, that ideally presents them with scenarios we know right through life they're going to be presented with situations that are perhaps quite unusual. And so how can we, through programs such as ICAS, support them in responding to these types of really skill and knowledge-based, competency-based assessments using higher order thinking skills. So the core of that really sits with Bloom's taxonomy. And what we're trying to do here, and if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, you'll get a sense of this diagram here. And really what we're looking at is the developmental continuum, where we're asking students, first of all, one, can we expect them to remember and recall facts within a specific question? How are they understanding what those facts might mean? How can they then apply those facts, rules and concepts and ideas to a specific situation they're presented with? They might then need to analyse that, break down the information into components and parts, evaluate, then judging the value of the information, the ideas that they're getting, and then combine and create a solution to a specific scenario. So if we now look at the right-hand side here and we look at a specific ICAS science question, and this is in a B paper. So what we're asking students to do in this question is around syrups. Syrups are thick, sticky liquids. The thicker the syrup, the more slowly it will move down a slope. What we're then asking students is the graph shows the distance of 4 different syrups moving down the distance 4 different syrups moved down a slope in 1 minute. So what we're asking is, in 1 minute, over the period of 1 minute, how far has the syrup moved? And so we're asking students to think really critically. First of all, recognise and recall the facts. Within the question, if syrups are thick and sticky liquids, and the thicker the syrup, the more slowly it will move down a slope, how can I then apply that fact to resolve the question? Can I understand what the facts mean? If I'm saying it's a thick and sticky liquid, and the thicker the syrup, the more slowly it moves, what does that mean when I come to answering the question? So we're asking students to really intentionally and deliberately apply their skills and knowledge to respond to this question. They might then have to break it down and say, well, let's have a look across the chart now. What's my knowledge of understanding graphs? How can they look at also the details on the graph? So the distance the syrup moved and the syrup itself. And then begin to break down that information to better understand, okay, I can see here now that the thickest syrup would be the blue syrup, given that it's moved the least over that 1 minute period of time. So we can see then how that's applied through this question. And so this is how we design our questions right throughout the entire ICAS suite. So when we begin to then break down the individual skills we're looking at, right across the 6 key subject areas that we seek to assess, we're asking students to demonstrate their knowledge in problem solving, in skill development, and being able to break that down. So we'll move on to the next slide and I'll be able to demonstrate with you there. These are the core areas we're asking students to be able to apply. Their creative thinking, how they're thinking really analytically, making those informed decisions based upon a question like the one we've just worked through. So very intentionally, our test development team spend a lot of time and energy supporting students to be able to engage with questions of this type. And so what we'll do is we'll move a little bit further through this webinar, and Nardin a bit later on will give you some insights around how to practice for these types of questions. Understanding that there are different ways that students can be presented with these questions to support their practice in readiness for ICAS in 2025. So what we'll do from here is I'll begin to proceed you through, and I think the best way to respond is to the context of ICAS is this quote here, which is from Adam Ritchie, a former student who scored 100% in ICAS science, which is quite unusual, I've got to say. And essentially what he's saying is, if as your boss I can Google the answer to something, really that's, in this day and age, particularly in the age of artificial intelligence and so on, that's not a lot of value. But if you can work with a really complex question or a really complex problem and be able to work out unique ways of applying knowledge and skills to answer it, that's truly valuable. And really that's the fundamental key behind what we're really striving for here with ICAS and how we can support students in engaging with these types of questions. We know students have incredible skills and knowledge. What we'd love to be able to do is present them with scenarios where they're very unique, that they may not be familiar with them, but we know they've got the skills and knowledge that we want to support them to use in a way where they can respond successfully to these questions. So what I'll do from here now is begin to work you through our ICAS reports. So this is once students have actually sat the assessment, we then present reports back to families, back to students, and back to schools. And so often there's a lot of interest around the reporting process. How does it work? What are the types of information that we can get back, and how can we best optimize that to support students? Ideally, we can use it to support students' next steps in their learning and give them a really good chance to be able to grow from the opportunity. So firstly, in terms of results, we don't actually release them until after the competition window has closed, specifically because it is a competition. It means that we have to ensure that all results are submitted across the window of testing, right across the country in Australia and New Zealand, before we can then release the results back to families. So Essentially what happens is once every student has sat across Australia and New Zealand, the data is processed, our assessment team works actively behind the scenes, and the reports are really carefully checked before being released to schools. Okay, and essentially what happens is around about 10 working days after the end of the competition windows, both families and schools will get access to the online reports first of all. So there'll be an initial results release within 10 working days of the competition window. And then following that, the process is that we have printed reports and certificates which are sent to schools, generally if your school's taking part, or if you are sitting at a testing centre or an ICAS testing centre or another provider for ICAS, they'll usually have a system with which they're providing it either for collection or posted out to you as a family. So as you can see in the diagram below, the students sit the ICAS assessment. The assessments and results then get assessed through a range of formats. Obviously, if it's a writing assessment, that will be manually assessed, and then reports are generated and checked. All of those details are available to schools, and also the online reports are available to parents. And so we'll talk you through the process from here about how that works. So when the reports come through to families and through to the school, we report performance in a few different ways. Firstly, we have a range of levels of achievement. So this is where we're trying to demonstrate to students their level of performance in relation to their peers within the region that they're participating in. So in our case, Australia and New Zealand, we have a range of levels. So essentially, when we are looking at high levels of performance, the highest performer in every state are our ICAS medal winners. So essentially what we're talking about is the students who have the highest mark for their subject in year level in their state. Sitting slightly below, only just below, but slightly below students with a medal are high distinction certificates recipients. And that is the top 1% of participants within the specific subject area receive a high distinction. So we're talking very high performance, top 1%. Then the next 10% below the top 1% are distinction certificate recipients. And so what we can see here, when we look at the table below the diagram here, we can actually then begin to look at what that represents in relation to a number of students out of 1,000. So for a high distinction, we can see that essentially the top 1% of participants is better than 990 students, so very high academic performance. The distinction in terms of the next 10% of participants, performing above 890 students. And we can see then as we move down the credit. So we're talking very high levels of performance down to the merit, which is better than 540 students across the cohort. And then participation essentially sitting for all remaining participants. And so even to receive a merit and credit are incredible achievements, and participation really, it's all about engagement, it's about personal growth and challenge, but it is also great to be able to celebrate the high achievements of students who've really strived for this opportunity and for these results. In terms of accessing the reports, what we can do is there's a format that we have every year. Now, if you're familiar with ICAS, you'll know there's a range of ways to access your result, one through your school, two through your child's online results portal. Now, to access your results, you have a special ID called a TAP ID and a PIN, which supports access to reports each year. Now, if you've registered via PPS or a parent payment system for your school, where you've logged on to the ICAS shop and you've purchased for your school so your child can sit ICAS at the school, you will receive in the lead up to ICAS an email which sends you the TAP ID and PIN information in readiness for the competition, and also in readiness for results release when it comes up. It will be resent closer to the competition because we know these sort of things do end up in inboxes and they can be hard to find. So we'll resend it again in due course. Schools, and sometimes it might be that your child's school sits ICAS, specifically they've managed the audit process, they sit it internally and privately themselves. They then have access to those results and they can support families in accessing those. But generally, if you're a parent payment system school, if you've gone online and you've accessed the payment and ordered assessments for your child for your school, that information will be emailed directly to you. Also, if your child has sat ICAS previously, you'd be familiar with their Tap ID and PIN, but also that will be the same Tap ID and PIN as previous years. So the idea behind that is that your child can begin to see their growth year on year. So rather than just having 1 year's individual isolated results, you'll be able to see them in relationship to their growth and the challenge that they've taken on year and how they've progressed in the years that they've engaged with ICAS. So a great opportunity. What we'll do now is I'll then give you some information around how the reports can then be accessed and then how that can be represented so you can begin to support your child in understanding their progress, how they've participated in the competition and how we can support their academic results and support them in their next steps. So firstly, as we've said, once you receive your Tap ID and PIN, traditionally if you're a parent payment system customer, that'll be emailed to you. Then there'll be the opportunity to be able to log on to the results portal, and we'll send you this information. And you'll be able to enter the Tap ID and PIN to enter it into the individual students portal. So we can see here on this specific page, we've got Addison, and Addison is a sample student here. And what we're going to do is just walk through Addison's results to give you a sense of what they look like, how to access the portal. And so what we can see here, first of all, is we've logged in using Addison's profile with a sample school, with a sample test, and we've logged in using a Tap ID and PIN. And then we can see, first of all, just down the bottom right-hand corner here, the ICAS subjects that Addison's undertaken. And so we can see in this instance in 2023 for ICAS, Addison was undertaking mathematics. And so this was the subject that Addison took part in 2023. If your child had undertaken more subjects, you might see additional subjects there as well. So if they've taken 4 subjects, you'd see all 4 subjects recorded there. Then what we can begin to do is actually drill down into the individual subjects. So we want to learn a little bit more about Addison's mathematics performance. So we can click on the mathematics and we end up on this page here. Now this is a summary or subject overview that gives us firstly an indication of how the students performed in the test overall. So we can see firstly, and we can get a breakdown of the performance. What was their level of performance? Was it a credit? In this case, it's a credit for Addison. And we can see then, and we can also get an indication around how that positions Addison in relation to the state that she's participated in. And then what we can begin to do is have a good look and dig into Addison's performance against her peers right across the country in mathematics. So we can come down first of all and see a total score summary. And then we can also begin to move down into the key skill areas to have a good look and understand how Addison's tracking against her peers. So firstly, when we look at the individual areas assessed, we can see where Addison was performing, and a single dot there shows where Addison is tracking compared to the state, for example. And so we can begin to look there and say, here's Addison well above in number and arithmetic, perhaps slightly below in algebra and patterns, but then we can also see in measure and units slightly above, space and geometry slightly above, and very high performing when it comes to charts and data. So we get a bit of a breakdown first of all of the individual assessment and how Addison's progressed as a holistic big picture view of performance. What we can then do is begin digging a little bit deeper. So from here, we can then move into individual question analysis. So this is really, really helpful. And to support your child in engaging with the results, it's useful to be able to break the test down further. And this is the value of ICAS reporting, is that we can actually use this not just to understand how your child's progressed in ICAS this year, which is a wonderful thing in itself, but also if they're really keen to grow and get better or to learn in certain areas around next steps for their learning or to engage again in ICAS next year, we can move right into the questions and understand more how they've progressed through the assessment itself. So in this instance, we've broken down the mathematics assessment for Addison into the individual questions of the test. And so what we can then begin to look at, well, okay, I can see Addison in the first 3 questions got correct there. That was excellent. So algebra and patterns, space and geometry, measurement and units has progressed okay. But then I can see in question 4, there's Addison answer was an incorrect item, and that was a number and arithmetic item, determining a correct expression needed to solve a problem. So really helpful to be able to look at that, but also understand how many students across the sample state got that item correct. And we can see in this case, it's 22%. So we can see it definitely wasn't an easy item for Addison to undertake. And so we can begin to get a bit of a reference point for how she's progressed through this assessment. We can also then move more deeply into sorting the questions and begin to analyse this in terms of the percentage correct across the state, and then get a better understanding of how Addison's performed against the state. So how's she progressed? Are there areas that she's struggling a little bit with? Are there areas that she'd like further support with, or things that we can celebrate because she's been working really hard on them and has done really well? So we can see here, first of all, that we can filter by percentage correct. Really nice to be able to see how the state's progressing or the country's progression in relation to Addison's performance. As we can see, if we zoom in on question 7, that was one of the easier questions of the assessment itself. Over half the state was able to get that item correct, but for some reason, Addison may have found that one a little bit difficult. Number and arithmetic may have been a challenge in that instance. Might have just been not an easy question for her, or it could have been a situation which just wasn't answering it to the normal degree that she would. So that happens, but it's good to be able to break that down and understand. Question 14, we can see if we break that down further, that's a more difficult question, and it was involving algebra and patterns. And we can see when we're talking about combined skills, that's where it does become more challenging for students often. So this is where it's a sequence of numbers. We're asking students to be able to resolve sequences of numbers and fractions. And so this is where the really applied skills and knowledge comes into play. We're asking students to be able to demonstrate the knowledge and skills that they have and be able to apply it to very unique situations. And it's likely that this was a question a bit like that, where Addison's found it a bit more complex because it's a sequence of fractions that's a little more complex than just answering one component of an item. So we can best see then really the in-depth information that we can begin to break down. And as we can see, if we moved here for Addison into sorting the questions and getting a sense of the impact that certain questions would have had on a student's score, we can begin to see the areas assessed and how that would have assisted Addison's overall outcome or her algebra score. So we can see, first of all, when we break down into individual areas assessed, if we look at algebra and patterns here on the top right-hand side, in the questions here, we can see that all of the top 5 areas assessed are algebra and patterns. And we can see of those 5, Addison really struggled with 3 of those items. So really useful information to be able to support your child in next steps, but also working out what's the most achievable next step. Where are the areas where it might be the best step in learning to be able to take on these? Not always the best to go for the hardest items or the most complex things as the next step. It's best to usually go for which are the ones were likely to be a fairly simple progression, and we can build from there in supporting their learning. So this reporting is really useful. It helps us to be able to analyse performance to a deep granular level. We're a lot of work with schools, and schools love to be able to apply this information in the school context, but it's really useful also for the family at home to be able to support your child in understanding how they've gone through the assessment, and if they're really keen to be able to take it forward, here are some of the key areas we might be able to work on for next steps. Okay, I will pass across now to Nardin, who will share a little bit around how to prepare your child for ICAS assessments. Thanks, Nardin.
Thank you so much, Matt, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. In my segment tonight, I'll be talking about how best to prepare your child for the competition day. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to share my 5 top tips. The first one is embracing the process of ICAS preparation as quality time with your child. Now, what we often see is that parents go into our shop, they purchase a lot of the past papers, they give the past papers to their child, they have a go, then they go through it, they mark it on their own. There's not a lot of quality learning that happens if you do it that way. So what we always encourage is that as a parent, if you sit with your child, and you don't have to carve out huge chunks of your time, you only need to, for example, focus about 10 to 15 minutes each day. And you can begin that practice, for example, from now all the way until test day. So each day, let's focus on 5 questions with your child. What you want to do when you sit together is the first thing is have your child read the question aloud to you. When they read it aloud, their eyes see it, their ear hears it, their mouth says it, and so their brain actually comprehends it. After reading the question together, then get them to read the actual the answers that are there, because it's usually a multiple choice question. And then throw it back to your child and ask them, what are the key words in the question? And which do you think is the correct answer or the most correct answer? And here we want to start applying reasoning skills. So your child might say, okay, this is the key word, and based on that, I think this one is the most correct answer. And promoting that discussion is really important to be able to build the foundations of problem solving skills. Now, you might get to some tricky questions where your child has no idea how to solve it and they don't even know where to begin. And that's where it's important that you as a parent, that's where you need to step in. So then you take the reins and then go ahead and you read the question to them. And then you talk out your thinking process. So you might say to them, well, these are the keywords that I've identified. And I know that based on this keyword, C is definitely not the right answer, and it can't be A either because of this, this, and this. So I would say the best answer is, for example, B, and then again, you can explain your thought process. And having that modeled to your child, then they're able to understand the thought process of that particular type of question. So that way, when they come to a similar type of question, they're able to copy that and then find the correct method as well. And then you might actually find questions that you both have no idea how to actually answer it. So we do have an answer key in the past papers. So what you can do is work backwards from the answer. So again, speak with your child and say, look, we definitely know the answer is this. Let's try and figure out how we actually get to that answer. Again, there's always AI these days, which are very helpful in explanations as well. So this is also something that you can do with your child. So what we want to do is building that platform of discussion, of reasoning, of problem solving, and teaching them how to actually build those skills is very important. The next tip is always having open-ended questioning, always in all discussions. And this is not just for practice, but it's definitely a lifestyle. So what you want to do is you want to try and avoid questions where there is a yes or no answer. So let's say, for example, your child is packing their bag for school. Instead of giving them a checklist and saying, did you pack your lunchbox? Did you pack your bottle? There, they just say either yes or no. Instead, throw it back to them in an open-ended way. You might just ask, what have you packed in your bag today? And then get them to be able to say the answer. And then if they're missing something, instead of saying, well, don't forget your bag or your library bag, say, for example, well, today's Tuesday. So what do you need to make sure you take with you to school? Oh, today's library. I need my library bag. Oh, today's sport. I need to take my hat. So it's really important that you allow your children to always engage in analysis and thinking deeply into every situation in their life. This now primes their mind to be able to problem solve quickly, not just in tests, but in any situation, which is what we want to develop in our children. So yeah, just making sure that we're always asking open-ended questions at home. The next one's a really fun activity. This is encouraging lateral thinking during household chores. So as we said in the first tip, yes, it is important to engage in past papers. It is important that children have a go with the types of questions. They need to understand the format of questions. They need to understand the words that come and really discussing that, but it isn't just limited to that. So during household chores, for example, you might throw a task towards them or pose a question or pose a scenario. So maybe, for example, let's say you're vacuuming. You can say, well, here we're using a vacuum cleaner. Give me 5 other uses for a vacuum cleaner, and none of them can be associated with cleaning. This now begins to unlock their creative thinking skills, which is what we need to start building in them. You can also think about, for example, counterfactual thinking. And this is now asking your children what if questions, and it's really backing them into a corner. So for example, let's say you're driving them to school and you can say, all right, tomorrow, hypothetically speaking, I can't drive you to school. How will you get there? They might come up with, the answer and say, well, if it's close enough, I might walk or I might ride my bike to school. And then you can say, well, what if it's raining and it's hailing and you just cannot walk or ride your bike? What else could you do? Well, maybe I might take the bus. Okay, well, on that particular day, all the buses are on strike. What would you do? Well, maybe I can get a lift with my friends. Well, what if your friend is also sick and unable to go to school? What would you do? So it's always asking these what if questions that consistently push them into corners to really delve deeper into problem solving scenarios. The next one is setting high expectations for your children. High expectations are important, but it's also really important to understand in order to achieve excellence, it needs to not only be high expectations, but they need to have small, reasonable, and actionable steps to get there. And what we want to do is we want to allow them to have small targets and we want them to reach it. And as soon as they reach that target, we're going to then push that target even further. So let's go back to point number 1. Let's say you are practicing some questions together, and let's say that you begin with 5 questions a night. Right at the beginning, you're going to do what I mentioned earlier because we really want to build those problem-solving skills as a basis. Once they start to become familiar with the questions and they're really understanding how to break questions down and they're able to apply problem-solving skills, then let's set the first target for your child. The first target is, I want you to independently complete 5 questions accurately. You have to read them all aloud by yourself. You need to figure out the answer all by yourself. And our aim is to get 5 of them, all of them correct. Now, at the beginning, they might struggle. They might ask for your help, and that's fine. But what we want to do is we want to get them to a place of independence and accuracy. Once they get to 5 questions done, fantastic. Let's now move it to 7. Now, once you get that done, let's move it to 10. Let's move it to 20. Let's do an entire past paper on your own, and let's work for accuracy. So what we want to do first is we want to build confidence. We want to be able for them to be able to work on their own, as well as ensuring they've got the correct answer as well. Now, the second to that, and this is one that parents always forget to do. A lot of parents say, well, my child's done all of the practice papers and they've done really well, but on test day at ICAS, they perform quite poorly. And so they don't understand. The missing element here is time. So during testing day, yes, we do have a time factor there, which often applies a lot of stress to students because they have to finish it within that particular time. But we don't want to add time too prematurely, because if they don't have the foundation of problem-solving skills, they're just going to be too flustered when they know there's time pressure added. So when you work first with independence and accuracy, there should be no time there. You want to give them all the space and all the time to really work things out in the way they need to. And then once they're confident with that, then we add the time limit to it. And of course, before test day, make sure you add time to it. What we want to do first is we want to start with double time to begin with. So let's say you're working on 20 questions. Let's give them 40 minutes. So that's double time, 2 minutes per question. And then if they can get it done within that time frame, let's bring it down. Let's do 20 questions in 30 minutes. Ideally, what you want to have your child doing is 1 minute per question. So 20 minutes, 20 questions. And that's where we really need to aim to get to before test day. And within that time frame, we're really pushing for accuracy at the same time. So once you can do that and you can establish those time frames as well as the confidence and the accuracy, that's how we find students really performing at the top level. The last one, of course, is making sure that a nourished body is also a nourished mind. So it is really important that they have some time preparing with you with past papers and having a go there, but it also means getting outside, exercising, socializing, and making sure that they've got some great nutritional meals, and of course, the night before having a really good sleep. All right, so let's have a look at some of the sample questions from our papers. Traditionally, you might know some of the exams or some of the competitions that your children enroll for, but if you don't know the other ones, we'll have a look together. So the first one is taken out of a digital technologies paper. So this one is all about spreadsheets and formulas, which are really great for young children to be able to engage with, particularly skills that are needed for the workforce today. The second one is taken out of our maths paper. So which shape does not show 1/4 shaded? Straight away, if a child knows that 1/4 means 1 of 4 equal parts, they're going to identify that D. It's not equal parts, that's the answer. And then they can quickly put the other pieces together. For example, C, they can move this box here and that's now 1 of 4. This one is 1 of 4, and then moving this one to the top, that is 1 of 4. And so questions like these, they can get it done in, for example, 10 seconds, allowing them time to actually spend on harder questions as well. This next one here is from our science paper. Students have to identify the scientific name of a fly. Of course, no one is expected to know that. The best thing about ICAS is that there is always enough information in the question to be able to problem solve and answer it. So even, for example, this maths question, if a student doesn't even know what 1/4 means, they would just be looking for the odd one out, basically. So here they'll be looking for, they'll be following the questions to find the answers, and then that will provide the correct answer. The next one is from our English paper. English is mainly made of reading comprehension, so you will find lots of passages and then, of course, associated questions with them. In order for children to work at their best in this particular paper, they need to be fluent readers. They need to be able to read quickly and accurately. They also need to be able to read with expression in their head, because then the expression then unlocks the comprehension. So they need to be able to read it in time as well. Being able to read the text quickly enough and understanding it and going through the questions, they should be able to quickly know, yes, I remember that answer. That was that one there. Go to the next question. Yes, that was the answer from that specific sentence or paragraph. So it's really important on the first read that they actually know how to do that. The next one comes from our spelling. This is our spelling bee paper. So it does have a couple of components. We do have the traditional spelling bee, and this is an audio component. And this is where the children will be listening through headphones, and they will be expected to listen to the word and then type their answer. So that is the first part of spelling bee. The second part is what you can see on my screen. They need to be able to identify the spelling errors. Now, we don't actually have spelling bee as past papers because they can't be put in a PDF format based on the audio component. So my best tip for you to be able to encourage your children to practice for this is that they need to understand different rules. They have to understand the spelling of base words as well as prefixes and suffixes. When you put them together, the rules that are applied. For example, are you changing the Y to I? Are you dropping the final E and adding ing? Understanding words like that have the schwa as well, the unstressed syllable. Understanding all of these components, then they're able to accurately do a great job in spelling. Of course, our last paper is writing. And very similar to NAPLAN, we have two different types of prompts. So it will either be the narrative or it will be the persuasive text. They won't know which one unless until test day itself. So it is really important that they are familiar with both types of text, understanding the structure of them, the language features for the persuasive devices that they need as well. And it is really important to note that all of our tests are online, including writing. Writing begins from year 3 onwards, whereas there are other tests from year 2. So it is very important that your children master their touch typing skills, because they might have a great story or a great piece of text, but unless it's typed up, it won't actually be marked. So really focusing on not just the structure and the ideas, but mastering touch typing at the same time. Okay, so on our website, we do have some great practice tools if you'd like to engage. We do have our past papers up for sale, and we have a great promotion at the moment. If you buy 3 past papers, you will get 1 free in your cart. We have specific to Australia and New Zealand, depending on the year levels. We also have Rise Plus, which is an online and interactive platform. And right down the bottom of that page, I highly recommend that your child has a go at the sample test. These are all for free. There are 5 questions based on each paper, each level, each subject. These are great just for your child to familiarize themselves with the platform, with the buttons, where to press next, where to flag, just to make sure that they're ready with that platform and they know what they're doing on test day. And just before we move on to the next point, we do have a really exciting launch as well coming up with our brand new digital past paper. This is from our latest, and this will help you get some questions that you've never actually seen before, not available in the shop. So definitely keep an eye on that. That will be, we'll send around an email, so you'll be able to find out more information. And of course, please make sure you follow our social media as well. In other exciting news, we have ICAS Student Scholarship Program. We will be awarding 200 students $100 each. So if you haven't yet put in an application for your children, we would love you to. Please note that our applications close this coming Friday. So we've got 3 more days to put that in if you haven't done that yet. And we will be announcing the recipients in 10 days, which will be the 27th of June. So we'd love to have you be part of that opportunity as well. If your school is not participating in ICAS, that is okay. You can be part of ICAS still. We have some external testing centres that you can have a look at. We definitely recommend that you have a look at each of these websites depending on the state that you're in. That way you can see whichever one is closest to you, and of course you can go ahead and register through there. If your school as well only offers a certain selection of subjects, for example, they might just offer English, math, science, but you're interested in maybe Digitech, writing, or the spelling bee, of course, you can also engage in those and compete in them through our testing centres as well. If you have any questions, feel free to jump onto our website. We have lots of information there, which is icasassessments.com. You can also access our helpful resources and our support materials online. We also have a huge range of FAQs. If you have a look at our website and you still can't find the answer that you're looking for, please contact our friendly service team, our customer service team. That can be on our Contact Us page. You can just simply fill out an online form or definitely call through our toll-free numbers. And with that, we are going to conclude our evening. We thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for taking in the time. And we can't wait to celebrate all the amazing achievements of your children. And we thank you so much for the opportunity that you are providing them, because it definitely sets them apart into growing into amazing people in the future. So with that, everyone, have an incredible evening, and we will see you soon. Bye, everyone.